I guess just starting really broadly, the predictions here, there is a big rebound in growth next year, back to pre-pandemic levels, and that's with net immigration obviously going backwards, factored into that, and of course a reasonably good view on what happens with the vaccine. So, gee, a lot can go sort of wrong from even these predictions.
Oh, yeah, like every budget, it's built on assumptions. I guess if you're going to argue in favour of the coalition, their assumptions since coming into power have always been conservative. You know, Scott Morrison's motto is under promise and over deliver.
Iron ore still down.
Iron ore, they still keep it at $55. It hasn't been that low since, forever. The vaccine thing, I mean, what was the general view? Maybe early next year, so they're saying later next year in the budget. It's a volatile time, but even that growth number, I think next financial year, Pat, isn't it? It's 4.5%.
Next financial year,
yeah. But that's coming, as the Treasurer said last week, that's coming off a low base.
Yeah.
So don't be sort of wowed by it. I mean, it's going from -1.5. So, and then they're forecasting trend growth the year after. So look, all budgets are always full of this stuff. I mean, in two months' time, we're going to have a mid-year economic fiscal update, a mid-year, and then another budget in May next year. So we've got two more of these in the next, 6 or 7 months. So you might even see these numbers don't even hold.
So maybe look at the policy and then see what happens with the other stuff. With maybe not sunny, but relatively positive predictions, unemployment gets to a 5, not until 2024. But if we look back at previous recessions and how long it took to get back to something approaching normal unemployment, is that actually a relatively ambitious, and that would be a relatively good achievement?
That would be a really good achievement if we could get it back towards where we were pre-COVID in a matter of 3 or 4 years. I mean, you look back at previous recessions, and we haven't had one since the early 90s, but then we were talking more like 10 or 15 years to get things back where they were. So if we can get that back in, a third of the time, that would be a massive achievement. But then again, this has been a funny recession as well. It's been an immediate shutdown. It's been jobs lost like that. And then, so there's the potential there that when things open up, everything goes well with the vaccine. It all depends on the health.
Pent-up demand that we hope is out there.
Yeah, and it could be that we have the the V-shaped recovery, the snapback that the
gone missing
abandoned.
for a while.
Yeah, that's right, abandoned. But it's now. It looks like the snapback's almost a little bit back in this budget.
I agree.
Debt ballooning for a long time. Look, no surprise. I think the interesting thing is that interest payments basically stay the same. We know the government's able to borrow at these very low rates. There can be a reckoning, though, one day, and this could be 10 or 20 years, when we need to refinance some of this debt. If we've got this net debt or gross debt, it doesn't really matter, of a couple of $1 trillion, that could hit the budget quite suddenly. If you're refinancing that and you just bump it up 1 percentage point from such lows, that's going to be a huge... And I know we're talking a long time. That could be a huge drag on the budget.
Well, interest rates will go up one day. I mean, as sure as eggs, they will just win. So, yes, of course. I mean, sorry.
And how far?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same reason people are warning people at the moment not be fooled and get in over your head and buy a big house you can't really afford if rates go up 1 or 2 points. So, but it's just, look, I guess it is what it is, and they did what had to be done. But that doesn't mean, you let law of the jungle take hold now and just dismiss debt because money's cheap. I know the Prime Minister, in some of his comments this morning and some of his interviews, was saying, this is not a blank cheque.
Yeah.
Cheap money is not a blank cheque. So there's a mindfulness, I guess, at least they're paying lip service to it, that it's not just a free-for-all. I think the danger is you spark an arms race in spending because suddenly this mindset takes hold that debt's no longer a problem because it's cheap.
And Labor would be thinking right now, well, hey, it's going to be pretty hard for them to run another debt and deficit disaster campaign, given where debt was when they ran it last time. And you can talk about whether that was sort of recurrent spending and get into that, sure, but the pure numbers here are massive. So that will be the interesting part about Anthony Albanese tomorrow.
Yeah, I can imagine that he will maybe not focus on that too much. I mean, I know that they've been running that line that you thought the debts and the deficits were so terrible after the GFC. Well, what happened to that argument now? But I think Australians generally accept that it does look like a worrying level of debt, but at the same time, like Finance Minister has said, I mean, what was the alternative? So I think Albanese will be more focused on who missed out in this...
But you've got to remember too, debt was sort of on the way up before the crisis too. So I think Labor is justified in pointing out.
Well, in all those years...
Yeah, debt had sort of doubled almost.
Just turning around the ship quickly and getting rid of the labour waste and she'll be didn't quite work. I was really interested, so there's under 35s focus on hiring them. presumably the concern here is anyone without a job who got used to JobKeeper, JobSeeker, whatever it might be. You know, the longer you're on these types of payments, the more ingrained it appears to become.
Yeah, well, they're not going to be there forever too. I mean, JobKeeper's not going to continue beyond March. I think we can safely say that now. So the whole focus has to be getting people back into work. And so if you're going to use taxpayers' money, it's probably a better idea to sort of steer them towards a real job than keep them in a job that probably no longer exists or isn't going to be sustainable. So that makes perfect sense. The controversy with this one is why just young people? There's a lot of people in their 40s and 50s have been laid off too, and they probably have less capacity to retrain or reskill than...
Yeah, and yet there's this government scheme that's been going for many years. As far as I can tell, it's still going. It's called Restart.
Yeah.
$10,000 if you hire someone over 50. I haven't heard anyone from the government.
No, and it's probably a mistake on their behalf because it's an obvious, what about the young folk, what about the older folk? And no, I haven't heard any of them in their defence say, well, we've already got this other scheme. Ian Yates from the Council of the Ageing told one of my colleagues yesterday that scheme's not working very well. It's not very well designed and needs a...
But you could have tweaked it in the budget.
I agree.
Said we've got something there as well.
I agree. I think it's a mistake.
Because that's the issue. Look, we know young people have been disproportionately hit. They will have a better chance, even if it takes some time, of getting back into the workforce. They're young, it's easier to pivot. If you're 55 right now and you find yourself out of a job, you're very worried about ageism when you're going for the job.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's true. The thought of losing my job, you know, when I'm 50 is terrifying, considering that you still have a lot of obligations, you've probably still got a loan, you're supporting all these kind of things.
Peak earning years before retirement.
Well, that's right. But on the other hand, when you look at recessions, and the Treasury Secretary told the government this, he said youth unemployment is the defining feature of the COVID recession.
And it was high before COVID too.
And it was high before COVID. It's gone up a lot. And also, you know, we saw that, you know, if that's what the Treasury Secretary is telling the government, and they've released a paper, you know, only a couple of months ago showing how much of an impact it has on your earning potential, on, you know, the scarring in the youth. Obviously, this idea that, you know, we really need to avoid this entrenched unemployment among young people is front of mind. And so perhaps that's what's steering this kind of focus on under 35s.
And they were more adversely affected. More young people lost their jobs, especially because the nature of the industries that are the worst affected, like retail, entertainment, you know, that sort of thing.
That's right.